going to go ahead and get started. We are going to tell you about us more as we go along. My name's Connie, this is Amanda, this is Paul, but we will tell you more about us and our programs a little bit later. We really envision this as a discussion about hybrids, or what hybrids are, or what hybrids are, and hopefully we can get a sense of how they can be used in our various programs, and we're very interested in how you use them as well, because I think it's a great opportunity for an expansion of our traditional programs. The definition of a hybrid, it's varied, but generally has to do with some sort of partnership between a placement and a faculty person, where both share the teaching responsibilities and the supervision responsibilities. To what level that is depends, of course, on the type of placement and the type of program. We're going to get into a little bit later about what maybe some specific definitions might be and how those relate to the ABA standards. So first we're going to tell you a little bit about what we do. My name is Connie Smotherman. I'm at the University of Oklahoma. Traditionally, we've just had traditional externship placements and clinical placements because of the requirement for the 6 experiential credit hours. We've added some simulation courses, but there really hasn't been any involvement with faculty or adjuncts. I have an administrative assistant, and she and I are it. So if anything is going to happen in the externship program at my law school, it's us. So, we do all the curriculum, we teach all the classes, we do all of the involvement with the students and with the site supervisors. Have had, most of my faculty have been very happy with that. They don't want to be involved. They're very nice people, but they really just assume that if we do it, we're fine, and they don't have to have that involvement. And so I haven't been successful at all in getting faculty involved or asking for help to teach the classes. That's just not something that the faculty is interested in. So we saw as an opportunity then that I could reach out to some of the site placements to help in some of these responsibilities, these teaching responsibilities. It's not going great. We're moving very slowly, but we are moving. And so I think I'm starting because they're so much more developed in what they're doing at Arizona than what we're doing. But I'm going to try, and I really do see it as a great opportunity to bring in some teaching partners that wouldn't be something that the faculty would maybe ever give me to do. So I'll tell you just a few of where we are and what we're doing. We have a diplomacy lab where I actually have a faculty person who is involved in this because we don't call it an externship or a clinic, but frankly it's probably a hybrid externship. She works with the State Department, and our students go to the State Department and they do projects there, and they're supervised and taught by both the State Department and by her in a classroom situation. But she does the majority of the classwork, and they do the majority of the supervision. So it's still closer to an externship than it is a hybrid. But they do enough of the teaching that I put it on my list today. We have another one, again, we're not calling it an externship because that way I can get a faculty member involved, called How to Drill a Well. And we have students who go, because I'm in Oklahoma, we have students who go to one of our big oil companies in the city, and they take actual seminars, classes there. And then there is a classroom component that one of our faculty members teach. In that particular situation, there's really a lot more teaching and supervision that happen at the oil company and very little that happens, in fact, very little supervision and a little bit of teaching that happens at the College of Law. So that's sort of a hybrid going more the other way. There are some projects, again, we're calling them projects instead of externships, but projects that happen through our clinic. The clinic, we only just have in-house clinics, and they are expanding to do some outreach, and they've done some partnerships with some of the district attorneys are doing a criminal reform project. We've passed some recent legislation that redefines, takes most felony drug cases and makes them misdemeanors for possession. No matter how many times you possess meth, it's going to be a misdemeanor. The question then was, what about those people who were convicted under the felony statute, just missed it being a misdemeanor, you know, gosh, if I'd only had my meth, you know, a month later, it would have been a misdemeanor. What do we do with those people? Some of whom, because of their history with drug possession and other things, were actually incarcerated. And so the district attorneys and the attorney general and the governor have this project to look at everyone and see if maybe they need their sentences, you know, reevaluated. And our clinic is going to do that, and so we have some partners at the DA's office who are actually going to do that in you would think would be an externship situation, but they have agreed to provide some teaching at the law school about prosecution and drug prosecution, and so I think that's going to be a good thing. Maybe a traditional hybrid that we're actually working on, but we're not there yet. We have met with members of the legal department, and I think we're going to get them on campus, and so we're going to actually be able to create a class where members of the legal department come and actually teach it, and then they work with our students that are placed there. And maybe a lot of you as well, but we have a lot of different departments of our legal department, of course, just the general, you know, civil department, but we have the athletic department, we have a huge health sciences, not that our athletic department isn't huge, I'm sorry, you know, I would be remiss if I didn't say that. Go OU Athletics. But we have a huge health sciences department that has a lot of lawyers attached to it. Because of the research that a lot of our doctors do, then we have a big IT component. And then student conduct has a large legal component. And so because of the number of students that we actually put in those departments, I think we are going to be able now to take those lawyers and put them in an actual class so that they are teaching the class, but the majority of the work that the students are going to do are going to be in those departments. These are not true hybrids, and I hope that we can get there because I really see it as an opportunity for growth in our department since we don't have the faculty support that maybe some other institutions have. So with that overview of what we don't do, but we're trying to do in Oklahoma, I'm going to turn it over to the Arizona people who actually have better models of hybrids, I think.
Good morning. My name is Amanda Bynum. I am the Director of Externships at the University of Arizona, where I do not actually manage any hybrid clinics right now. But prior to this role, I was the director of our criminal defense clinic, which is a hybrid clinic. After I graduated from law school, I worked in private practice for 2 years, and then I was a public defender for 5 years. I worked as a full-time public defender and an adjunct faculty member where I taught the classroom component for the criminal defense clinic in-house at the public defender's office. They came to our conference room, and then I managed about 11 to 15 students that were actually placed with individual other public defenders. So they didn't all work on my cases, Instead, they were assigned to other attorneys in my office. I want to give a little bit of history to the program and sort of how I came into that role to give some context as to why I think the program was successful. Prior to me, there was one other person that was also a full-time public defender that was teaching this clinic, and he kind of reached out to me and recruited me, and luckily they liked me too. Before that, it was a full-time faculty member that managed the clinic and worked in-house at the law school. I like the model of having the full-time public defender teach the clinic because I think that it gets students a lot more, a better experience. Prior to me taking over the program, there was a classroom component, but I would say that it was mediocre at best. The professor taught a couple of courses and then had the students basically just present for the rest of the semester on any topic. They weren't teaching with another attorney. And repeaters in the clinic, which there are a lot of them, some of my students would be at the public defender's office for 2 or 3 semesters, were not required to do the classroom component. So the first thing that I did was come in and create a syllabus where we had classes every week regardless of whether or not you were a repeater, which created some challenges because I had to make a unique syllabus for 3 semesters in a row. But it was fun, and it's easy when you're pulling in guest speakers from the community because you can teach on the same topics from a different perspective, and the students actually really liked that. The issues that we taught in our course are not the same issues that are not the same topics that I'm teaching in my externship class. The idea of reflective practice and professional identity is sort of developed new to me. And instead I taught criminal defense related subjects as if I was running a CLE program or a new attorney training program. And that was my history. I was the seminar committee chair for our criminal defense organization, which is, I think, how I got involved in academia, was I was teaching through that. So the topics that we taught were, things about interviewing specific criminal defense related things, how to work up a case, and then our students are certified under the student practice rule. So there was a student in my class who did 6 jury trials over the course of 2 semesters, including like child molestation, drug cases, very serious felony cases with experienced attorneys sitting at the table. They also were required to submit weekly journals, so it was a lot of work. Prior to leading the clinic, I also was a field supervisor, so I had a student that worked for me, and when I took over leading the clinic, I didn't feel that I had the time, so I didn't actually supervise students unless they weren't getting a good experience, they weren't getting the trials that they wanted, or they weren't getting the court appearances that they wanted, and then they would come to me and I would say, well, here's a probation mandatory drug case, let's work on this together, you can do this jury trial, or you can help me with my cases. Then I was also involved in being a liaison to the law school, which I think was really important, and I think that because I wasn't on campus, it's really easy to be disconnected in a hybrid clinic and not have a good relationship with the law school, but they really welcomed me and they invited me to their clinical meetings every single bi-monthly. They sent me to trainings so that I was really up on the clinical pedagogy and making sure that I was not just getting students to work for us for free at the public defender's office. So that's sort of an overview of the clinic that I ran. My colleague, Dr. Willie Jordan Curtis, couldn't make it, so I just wanted to talk really briefly about what she does in her clinic because it's similar to my public defender clinic. So she runs our criminal prosecution clinic, which I was just talking to Bob in the last session about how it's probably not a clinic at all and is an externship under the rules. But she is our dean of students, and so she runs the prosecution clinic, which is a placement clinic. These students are placed in multiple prosecutor offices throughout our town. And I should mention that in my public defender clinic, Most of the students were placed in my public defender office, but we also had a conflict counsel office that I was able to send students there. And we also have a city public defender that does misdemeanors, and I was able to send students there also. So they weren't all in-house at my office. And those students may have been more like an externship than a clinic because they weren't in my office. So Dr. Jordan Curtis sends students to these different prosecutors' office. There's also a year-long fellowship where students get a stipend to work at 4 or 5 different agencies over the course of a year. She teaches the classroom component in pretty much the same manner as I do, where she brings in members of the community, prosecutors, to talk about prosecution-related subjects, and then they go work in the field under the student practice rule. So those are the sort of the overviews of the clinics, hybrid clinics that I'm familiar with, and I'll hand it over to Paul.
I'm always, when I'm thinking about stuff, I don't run a hybrid clinic, although I did for a short period of time as an interim director, which is a good idea. I'm not continuing that. I'm the clinic director, but when we're designing programs, I'm reminded of the scene in The Princess Bride where Wesley's starting to wake up just before they storm the castle, and he asks, "What are our assets?" And that's kind of the question for us in any clinic design is, what are our assets? What do we have that we can work with? In a traditional clinic that I have, there's things we do really well, but there's things I can't do at all. I can't recreate a law office atmosphere that's meaningful because it's artificial, the law office we have. If someone doesn't like the supervisor, well, it's me. So, it's hard for them to complain about it or talk about it. The things that students learn by just being in a different place of work, skill sets and the things they have to negotiate, I can't recreate that in a traditional clinic. And I also can't offer certain subject matters because we just, we don't have 50 clinics, but we have students with 50 different interests. But once in a while, there's enough of a critical mass in an area that maybe we can see if we can try to do the best of both worlds. So I'm going to give you an example. We created a couple years ago an intellectual property clinic. It's untraditional for us. Our clinics have generally been social justice kinds of things, public interest things. But we had an asset. The asset was the United States Patent and Trade Office wanted to set up a pro bono program in Arizona where, it's like Shark Tank. I guess where young inventors or poor inventors can get their stuff patented so they can move forward with whatever idea they had, and our students can assist them. So it's a hybrid program in that some of the things that they do are done strictly in-house by our clinic director, but many of the things they do are farmed out to pro bono attorneys who volunteering with the government to help folks get their stuff patented or trademarked. I don't really know how it works technically, but I do know about the relationships. And what we find is that if we structure that the right way and if we're very diligent about drawing on what's the best of both things, then we can help sort of take some of the best of an in-house clinic, the group dynamic to me being the most important thing, those informal conversations where you have somebody who's always there for you as a teacher, not necessarily someone trying to teach when they have a day job. Doing something else, but also the best dynamics of working with people in the field who are doing this stuff day to day in the context of how it actually gets done in the field. There's a movie buff, but there's a wonderful scene from Training Day where Denzel Washington's there with the young recruit, Ethan Hawke. And I used to play it, but there were too many F-bombs, and I got too much criticism for that. Where he says, he's the cop in the car, and he says to the rookie cop, forget everything you learned in the academy, this is how we do it here. And I'm pretty sure all of you have experienced that with your field supervisors. And that's what they say in law school. Here's how we really do it. But that's an important experience for them to have and be able to negotiate it, to have someone they can still talk to about that. So that's one of the ones we do.
Do you all have any other types of hybrid clinics at your institutions? What do your programs look like?
Well, I have one, I run what's called a practice clinic in high school. And so we have embedded offices in the courts. So I have one in family court, I have one in federal court in one city, and then a different city. So For federal court, since I'm a federal court and not a family court practitioner, I run the substantive classes on federal court law, and in particular, those that we see in the clinic, but we provide limited scope legal services right in the courthouse.
Who supervises the legal use?
So the legal work, well, I often do, and I'm also the conflict attorney, but we have a outside community partnership with our Volunteer Lawyers Project. And so we have, when we started this, we screened all the lawyers. So we're in Buffalo, so it's small, everybody sort of knows each other. So we brought in federal court practitioners as volunteer attorneys. So it just depends. We'll rotate throughout.
We're a small law school. I'm at Atlanta's John Marshall. And we have a veterans, a hybrid that we do at Fort McPherson. And it's supervised by volunteer lawyers also. They do the supervision. I teach the course component. And it's on site at the VA hospital. And then we have a partnership with Atlanta Legal Aid to do, Atlanta Legal Aid, we have a hybrid family court. And they do the supervision, but they also do the training, because they have a very intensive training program.
And all of that both of those, the teaching all takes place off-site.
Right, right. So, well, the teaching for the Veterans Clinic takes place on-site at the law school,
Okay.
but the work is actually performed there outside. But for the Atlanta Legal Aid Family Law Clinic, everything happens at that time.
Who develops the curriculum or the syllabus for the class components that's off-site? That's something that's, been kind of an interesting topic for us to think about.
For
The legal aid clinic.
For the legal aid clinic, they develop it.
Okay. And then do you have supervision over that curriculum?
In some ways, only because it's an externship, and they also do my advanced seminar. But in terms of what they're actually learning as a practitioner, no, we just coordinate. You know what I mean? We coordinate those things. Well, I don't even know what to call that. You know what I mean?
Well, that's what, I mean, we struggle
That's why
with
we-
that.
that's
That's
why
why I'm here. You know what I mean? Because I don't even know what to call it.
Right.
It's hard to, and be compliant, you know what I mean, with the ADA standards. So
Right.
we've struggled with that, with both of them, actually.
Because, the standards define so much what is a
Exactly.
clinic, what is an externship, and, it doesn't appear that the two shall ever meet, even though we're just gonna cram them in there with law review and competitions. But there really is the crossover, and then the, partnership with the community, and
Right.
it's hard to make all those fit into standards. I agree with that. You said somebody else over
Yeah.
So I'm Adrienne from Boston University, and we traditionally always had a clearly defined externship bucket, a clearly defined clinic bucket, and about 2 years ago, we started something we call the Environmental Justice Practicum. So we have an adjunct who has taught environmental justice as well as a climate change class for several years. So she set up a partnership with a couple environmental and environmental justice organizations in Boston, where the students, she would help facilitate getting projects, and they're mostly policy-related projects, and the students would work on the projects, and it was conceived they would be supervised both by the adjunct and the attorneys in the field, and in fact, some of the courses, like the seminar classes, maybe those would even be down at the organization. So we called it a practicum in order to, because it's like we needed the new bucket, and we didn't have a practicum. So that's what we called it, and here we are, we're several years later, and we have just submitted a proposal to, like our JD committee, had to go through the full the full committee thing, like everything related to clinics, to change the name from practicum to clinic, because we're finding, first off, employers, in looking at the students' transcripts and resumes, were kind of like, what on earth is this practicum thing? Like, they understand clinic and externship, but what is this? So that was confusing, but also we have found, as time has gone on, that the environmental organizations really are more like a client. They're not, haven't been engaged in the vision as we envisioned. So we're changing it to clinic, but what it's really brought up for us, is the issue of the definitions. We never actually defined what a practicum is, and faculty are confused by that, and so now we have to like sort through the whole thing, which is why I'm here. So.
Well, I'm Elizabeth Curran from the University of Georgia, and I was going to share a couple hybrids we actually don't have right now, because I think they demonstrate some of the value of hybrid. So our public defender's office, what was interesting about it is that the University of Georgia had a law school clinic for a criminal defense clinic in the 60s, the late 60s, before there was a public defender's office here in Athens. And so it evolved so that the law school clinic actually became the public defender for our two-county circuit, and I came through it as a student, very similar to your story. I came through as a student. There was an individual whose salary was, he was a professor at the law school part-time, head of the public defender's office, this kind of 50-50 salary. And in 2000 or 2004, whenever our public defender system in Georgia got taken over by the state, his role split off to stay exclusively with the university and teach law school exclusively, and then the public defender taught as public defender. So I worked there as basically an attorney supervisor, and now I teach another class at the law school. But while I think the splitting, and it now is more of an externship placement, allowed that professor to spend a lot more time on the teaching end of it, he's also lost control of the supervisory end of it. And so, also, I guess I'm biased, having come through as a student and attorney, but, some of the kind of meet and pleads on misdemeanors, some of the things you're trying to teach your students not to do, you don't have much control to control that anymore. And so I know that he's figuring out, like, how do I teach students that, hey, there's a different way to do it, or what you're getting at your placement. And we also used to have a prisoner legal counseling project, which was subcontracted with the Department of Corrections, where it was post-conviction relief, and the professor was a professor part-time, and the head part-time. But in the 90s, the Department of Corrections decided they didn't have a constitutional right to do that anymore. So, that went away because that contract went away. But I think hybrid, I don't think we currently really have a true hybrid at the University of Georgia right now, but I think hybrid models can have real advantages.
We have a couple of discussion questions, and we don't have to stick to our script by any means, but we'll just throw them out there and we'll just see where we go. I do think it's just such a new area, and we're all trying to, it sounds like, define sort of the same thing of, what do we call it, where does it fit in the ABA standards, who really is in control of it, because the few things that we do have at my school, don't come under me. So in order to have them, I've had to, let go. But then, what does that mean as far as meeting the ABA standards? Because, I'm not sure that there's as clear of understanding of those as there might be in my department. So, all right. So our first one is
how to help students get the most out of the hybrid's binary supervision. So I think that the model of having the adjunct faculty member working at the public defender's office gives that professor so much more control and knowledge about what's going on. So even those students that were in the conflict counsel or the misdemeanor public defender's office, they were still downtown and they still had to come to my classroom. And so they knew that they could come to my office at any time as if I was a colleague. And I really treated my students like they were brand new attorneys at the office and that we were colleagues. And I think that built up a lot of trust. But because I wasn't doing the direct supervision, that can be really hard, and I'm experiencing this now as the director of externships, to know what's really going on, whether they're getting the good supervision, whether they're getting good experience. But I had such an intimate familiarity with all of these attorneys that were supervising my students because they were down the hall from me. And I had to learn the hard way a couple of times that not every good attorney is a good supervisor. But if I wasn't there on the ground, then I wouldn't necessarily be able to see that. And when those things happened, because I also had a full-time caseload, I was able to, like I mentioned, intervene and give the students work on my caseload to do. And then I just wanted to touch on something that came up in another session yesterday. And someone asked, if a faculty member is a full-time employee at the placement, are there issues with students who are having issues approaching the professor and saying, you know, I don't want to mess up this relationship because I might want to get a job here afterwards, or you're going to go tell your colleague that I was complaining about them. And I really didn't have that issue. And I think that it was because I treated my students like they were entry-level attorneys and like I was their colleague and that they could trust me. And so I did have students that would say, my attorney's not letting me do court appearances, or, you know, I got this criticism that I didn't think was appropriate, and I was able to deal with that without causing any issues. And then a lot of those students did go on to get employed at the office, regardless of those complaints that they might have had. And so I just think there's a really big benefit to being on the ground doing the same work as the students. And yeah.
That is a concern. You know, I told you we were working with the legal counsel, the legal departments, and they agree they're going to come in and, you know, teach the class together, and we're working to get adjunct pay for them. I don't know that will happen, but, you know, I'm doing my best, and that was one of their, we had a whole lunch over this idea of discipline. So, you know, what do they do? It's kind of the reverse of what you just said from yesterday, but, you know, sort of the reverse of how far can they go in disciplining someone at their site that then they have to see in class, and sort of having, you know, that dual role. So have any have ideas on this, or have had experience with this? Any problems with that?
Let me rephrase it.
Okay.
It's something I observed. There's a plus and minus to the binary supervision. The plus being, especially in the traditional clinic, students get exposed to one point of view, one lawyering style for the most part. I mean, not all. Sometimes they're team taught or whatever. I remember when I was a law student, our clinic professor ended every sentence on the up. And by the end of the first semester, we all did that. We talked like him. Because he was the one person that we were exposed to, and that was a real lawyer. The downside is that sometimes there's a mommy-daddy thing going on, where they're not getting what they want over here, so they ask over here. And I remember when my kids were growing up, I finally learned to say, well, what did mom say when you went to her? And that we have to manage that. And in a hybrid clinic, it's a little, it's easier and harder to manage. I mean, it's easier because you're more involved than you might be with a traditional externship, because you have a whole group of students with a group of people and a common thread to what they're doing. It's harder because they're the people you work with down the hall. If you're present, or even if you're not present, I mean, they're a group of people that you have a relationship with. So it's just something that you have to be incredibly mindful of to navigate it, but if we do it well, we give them real advantages that we can't give them in other settings.
This may come up with the topic of grades, which maybe we'll get to later, but those of you that sort of have these hybrid experiences, are the attorneys, the non-faculty attorneys or the adjuncts that are working in these placements, are they giving grades, or is it just a pass-fail, or? You do what?
I mean, we used to grade, and I think the individual teacher, the professor teaching the class took like the supervisor's grade under consideration, but was not dictated by it because he could see that different attorneys graded differently. So he would be kind of the evening factor to like even out the grades, and it would be ultimately up to him.
Ours is pass fail.
Yeah, ours is too.
If you don't mind me bringing up the topic of grades, because I need some feedback. We've traditionally drawn a line between if you're the person observing what the student does, we can make it a graded program, but if someone else is observing, we make it pass-fail. And I'm not sure that line makes any sense anymore, but That's the one we have. And we've had students who have rightly come to me and say, why can't I get a grade? And we have an attorney general clinic that's very similar to prosecution clinic. The person who runs it is terrific, her class is terrific, her supervision is terrific, but some of the students' day-to-day work is farmed out to other assistant attorney generals than she. And should that be graded? And the reasons grades matter, well, two reasons. Reason number one is we have a minimum graded unit to graduate, so I hate to have a student not be able to take advantage of a really great opportunity to experience something they can't experience in the classroom because they don't have enough graded units. I have faculty who's extremely worried about grade inflation. Why? Because we give out all A's. Why? Because they do some great work, you know, and often need to be rewarded for that work and should be. What do y'all think? I mean, does it make sense? Is it possible to grade students fairly when they're supervised by different people?
I have a survey that I give out I ask all of the supervisors to fill out the survey. It's on a scale of 1 to 5, right? So like, not at all prepared to, every day, what I do is then I have them all fill it out, and I created a system where I grade it. But basically, I just find out what the percentage is, and then I average the percentages over all of it, and all of that is worth 30% of the total grade for the class. Which I guess is a lot of math.
Is it a graded class?
Mine is a graded class, but the external bit total can only be worth 30%. So it's like a midterm. For us, I based it on what the other faculty put I think a midterm or something. And then those are over all of that total is over all of the surveys that I got back from all of the people that supervise them.
And what's the other 70%?
Mine is different, so I'm in a
That's the
different
point of
country,
it.
right? So I created a mini thesis defense at the end. So we've become the capstone graduation class. So I make all of my students have to stand up and defend their performance in the program before our dean, our associate deans, and the faculty guest graders. So they have to create an executive summary, they have to create a PowerPoint, and then they have to give a 3-minute speech, and then they are open to 3 minutes worth of questioning on any subject in their anything. So if they went to a law firm, they can be asked by the faculty. I give the faculty their executive summaries and beg them to read it in advance. They might not. But then they can question them on the laws that they worked on, or their experience, or what they learned, and it's designed to scare the poop out of them, but they're very proud of themselves at the end. So that's another 30%er, and then that's my 60%, and then everything else is, smaller assignments. We have an interview assignment, we have weekly timesheets, reflections, and general professionalism assignments.
And what's this course called?
I'm in Doha, Qatar. We're called the externship. It's an externship program. Yeah. In Arabic, it's an external training program. Yeah.
Well, I just want to clarify, I guess when I say graded, we have a compromise we've had for many, many years, which is 50% letter grade, 50% pass-fail, which I think was somewhat the university's response to the grade inflation argument, right? But, so I would say it's kind of similar to what she was describing. It's about and this is true not just for the public defender's office, I think in how it uses training, but other externships that I've taught, that it's a roughly 30% or so for the work of the placement, and we try to do a questionnaire that we tried to revise a number of times. We tried to ask supervisors to comment on various drafts of written work, but it's just hard, right? It's hard to get consistency across supervisors. So it is weighted, but it's weighted not 50% or 70%. So then the other part is reflective writing, kind of class participation, assigning readings, how do they incorporate those readings into their journals, things like that. I don't make them defend in front of the whole faculty.
At one point, we had an immigration hybrid that operated out of one of our nonprofit organizations' office and Catholic Charities. And then we had a professor that taught the immigration course. on site, and that was graded. All of that was graded, and he would collaborate with the placement to come up with the grade. And I didn't do much of that, but it was under our experiential learning umbrella, and it did operate as a hybrid. But that was a graded course.
So mine's a graded course. And what I do for the field work, well, I'm there in federal court quite often, but for family court, I teach with an adjunct who was in family court, but not part of the community organization. So the two, they call them supervising attorneys, even though they're not the attorneys actually giving the legal advice. We meet at least twice a semester, and that's how we determine the field work portion of the grade, which is 45%. Then we do 35% of the paper, 10% for oral presentation, and another 10% for journals, timesheets, and general professionalism.
I want to share my experience was my students worked really hard when they were in the public defender clinic. Some of them were there almost all the time, and they really liked it, but it was a lot of work. And a common complaint I got was that, why is this clinic not graded when there's other clinics that are, and I don't think my fellow students are working as hard as I am, and it's a great learning experience for these students, and so they frequently brought that up. And I think there are some pros and cons. I think that the work they're doing, they want to get a grade because they have to get a certain number of graded units, and there are certainly people that you could clearly see people that were putting in more work and performing better, but there's also this like issue of problematic students, right? And if at some point you found out, oh, well, this student just stopped showing up or something, or they, you know, their work has been not great, they said they were going to do things and they didn't, and frequently supervisors would wait too long to bring you that information, and I'm sure you guys have experienced some of that also. And so it was like too late to intervene, and the field supervisor, you know, is frustrated with the student and wants to fail them because I only have two options of pass fail. And so then I had to take a step back and think, well, you know, a pass is a wide range of grades. And so I think that is sort of a setback in that a person who is doing an amazing job is getting the same grade as someone who kind of flaked out at the end. And I feel like I had to task them because, yeah, maybe, you know, they did some work, they did, you know, half or most of the semester before they flaked out, and then, you know, you disappointed your attorney or your clients, but is that a D? And so you still give them a pass, and that was always frustrating for me that they got the same exact grade as someone who was outstanding, and it looks the same on their resume.
So do you have a wide range of grades then on any given semester?
Well, it was pass-fail, so I didn't have the option to give those grades, but I think that each semester I did it, there would be one student that I think probably would have gotten one of those lower grades, you know, and I wish I had that ability because I think it would give me more teeth and maybe motivate them more. But at the same time, I feel like if it's pass-fail, maybe the students are doing it because they really want to, because they want to get the experience, because they're passionate about what we're doing. I think there's pros and cons to both sides.
And you probably don't have any control over this, but at Elon, which is where I'm at, we have a high pass and a low pass, which is nice for that reason.
Yeah.
But maybe it's something you can add.
And it's reflected that way on their transcripts?
Yes.
Yes.
Does it say low pass or just pass?
I think it's LP.
Oh, it actually says low pass.
Yeah.
Wow.
Barely passed.
We have pass-fail. We don't have a lot of problems. We failed someone a couple of years ago, and that has allowed some reduction in some of the motivation problems just because we said we would. I mean, we did. And so, you know, that rumor sort of kind of came out. But it was a total fail. I mean, it was, you know, like Amanda said, it had to be a total breakdown before we actually failed someone. And we've had supervisors call and say, you know, this really isn't going quite as well. Not many. I mean, the majority of them, I think, do a good job. But then you have to decide, well, how much of them not doing it, you know, is a pass. One of the things that we're lucky about is, or when we do pass-fail, I think, is that our classroom component is a different class than the externship class. And so you could actually pass one and fail the other. Which, the one that we failed, that's what happened. We passed one and failed the other. Did you have-
Separate grade for the class. It's like do you have like APs, BPs, CPs?
I mean, in terms of our, like, arrangement's really how your GPA is weighted, so we
Yeah.
have this, like, so if you might take 4 credit hours, you're getting, and you get A's, you get 2 of those A's counted towards your GPA, 2 units of those A's and 2 units not, so it really just, in fact, when I was in law school, I didn't realize that it was weighted, so, you know, maybe I would have graduated higher if I had all A's, but, yeah, so it's more like a GPA consideration, but that's an interesting way to do it as well, like how you separate out the 2 components.
Yeah, our hybrid, I guess, is a prosecution clinic and a public defender clinic, with the placements really. And they have a 3-credit course that's graded and 6 credits of placement time that's ungraded.
So one is graded, one is not. Well, that's interesting too.
Yeah, my question's a little odd though. I was just wondering if anyone had, all right, so I work in the Middle East, right? So yeah, it's a different, but if anyone had pressure by students to negotiate their grade with supervisors, because why I had to take away so many, why it's only 30%, and I don't even like making it 30%, is because I found that students from prominent families were graded, and then they go threaten or let's say negotiate. So I get the grades, and I do it, and I give the grades, and then I get a call from a supervisor saying, you need to amend Aisha's score, because Aisha's from a higher tribe. And I was just curious if this also happens in America. or is there any, or no,
It happens in regular courses, that is,
Yeah.
you might get
Yeah.
calls from parents, the
Okay.
associate dean, academic dean,
yeah,
complaining about a grade, but you have to have strict rules,
yeah.
say no.
Yeah, no, you don't,
You don't
but
change it.
you don't change it, but I was just wondering.
Oh, do you have
They were
rules
graded.
about, like, having somebody supervise?
Who's
someone
not
you know?
failing,
Yeah,
yeah,
or
we have
like
all that.
would, but it still happens.
It doesn't matter because it's a different society.
Yeah.
And if you have an expat as your supervisor and you're local, you can wield significant power.
Oh, somebody's life is at risk.
Yeah.
It's a whole different ballgame.
Maybe we can segue that, and I'm stretching here, but into one of our next topics, which is sort of improving can hybrids improve the relationship between the law school and the community in a different way than, say, a traditional clinic or traditional externship? You know, obviously when Amanda was running the clinic, we had a different kind of relationship than we would have in an externship. Not quite the same kind of relationship we might have had she been running an in-house clinic.
So at the school I was at previously, which was Charlotte School of Law, which no longer exists, but I was the director of experiential education, and I came in, creating the law school at that level, that my view of it was that we do kind of a constant needs assessment in the community and working with community partners, and we have our clinics doing some things, and we have our externships, with our students going out, but where there are areas of need in which there might not be a supervising attorney, for example, then we can think about these hybrid situations where we can maybe, for example, have a faculty member who teaches, trusts and wills to do we do a clinical lab that we would attach to that course, and students could work on wills for vets, that kind of thing. So, so that was one way I looked at it, as kind of trying to have my hand on the pulse of the community and seeing, what the need was, and then how could students fill that need, and how can I help bridge that?
I would say it's definitely helped. I think, especially, I would just offer, but for the relationship between the clinical program, the live in-house clinic program and the externship program. And that, because of exactly what Cindy just said, we're right there in a way sometimes that maybe the clinic can't be or isn't, depending on the subject matter. And so it's opened up a good feedback loop for us, for me to be able to share clinic program, hey, here's what the students are seeing, or here's what our community partners are saying. For us, where we're headed is for the students, creating a couple of hybrids in areas that sort of around where students, that the placements don't fit well in those general externship classes. So I have the class that's the ACLU students and the legal aid students and the public defender students and whatnot, but then there's the IRS guy. And creating that syllabus is obviously far more difficult than if I had, and it doesn't work super well for the student that's out there. So we've been working in kind of the tax area as we've headed also towards an LLM, and the idea is actually to grab a couple of different practitioners. So not just one where it's a partnership between myself and or whomever and on the faculty and like the IRS person, but the IRS and a person who does tax for an NGO, a person who's doing tax at general counsel. So we're getting that multi-level perspective, and students are at all of those places. So we're trying to kind of develop that now and figure out how that might go. Some of the issues that have come up have really been about, because we might include LLM students, we've got issues just connected to where they can be placed. Fed government, right, not necessarily allowing everyone, like that kind of stuff. But so far, it seems like the students have been, we have I just created a little small committee, I don't know, I'm calling them a committee, I don't know if that's necessarily, it's not that formal, with a couple of students on it, and they've been very excited about the hybrid idea. Because exactly what I think Amanda was describing is they really want that, in addition to the in-the-field work, they want the in-the-field learning too. And I think that they feel more, what has been expressed is they seem to be more comfortable with the idea though that in-the-field learning is being supervised by me. So that when there is an issue or whatever, that they've got us to come to, which is nice. But that if it, I don't know, I think they assume that we're all magical teaching beings, and so that we know, which is good, we try and encourage that unicorns
But you are.
of legal education, yes. And but I think they have the built-in concern that some of the lawyers might be great lawyers but not good supervisors, or might be great lawyers and decent supervisors, but that doesn't make them necessarily great classroom teachers. And so that combo seems to be really well received by the students.
So what classroom component does your IRS student go to then?
So we've created a tax, it's in essence its own tax specific, we were tossing around the word practicum too for that very reason, right? It's a new bucket. It is a tax specific, in essence it's a tax specific externship course.
Okay.
That's got a blend of skills pieces, sort of the general stuff that I'd be doing in my class, systemic issues, self-care, like all of those things that I would generally cover. And then we've got guest lecturers coming in to talk about issues that are more current issues and things that are going on. So it's kind of a blend, but very subject area specific.
Do your guest lectures come in live every semester? I mean, is that what you anticipate? Or, you know, we're thinking about this sort of video concept of maybe having, recording, presentations and then having the students.
Because of where we're located, it's easy to get a variety, right? We have the benefit of, we've got LA people and San Diego people and Orange County people, so probably do live. I would vote that I don't personally love the video lecture piece, but the utilizing of video conferencing and utilizing Zoom and that tech to get folks in. And that also means you could probably get folks that wouldn't be able to come in or can't afford to bring in, but right, and go a little higher level. We did that at Wayne with our corporate counsel externship program, and it worked really well to have a wide variety of folks come in. I thought I heard Bob.
I was just trying to figure out, you're categorizing this as a externship or as a clinic?
It is as yet uncategorized for probably reasons that you're about to ask questions about.
Well,
No,
let's
so
talk about
I'm just wondering, so these are adjuncts or these are more field supervisors?
Well, if they are going to be teaching with me, then they will not be field supervisors at the same time. They were originally people who have done field supervision work in the past, and I'll be bringing them, and we will be able to, we're lucky enough to be able to bring them in as what we would call Unit 18 lectures, but adjuncts for the people who are sane, meaning people outside the University of California system. So yeah, they'll be
So they'll
adjuncts.
actually get a faculty appointment?
Yep.
I see.
We'll run them through. Now, we run through, even if I, for example, I teach it, I'm sorry, I'm like turning my back to you. I teach a juvenile justice class that's becoming a non-required clinic. I'm doing that in partnership with our ACLU folks, and I'm even running them through. So I'll run them past the faculty too.
The interesting thing to me is we go so far away from the hybrid defined by Peter Joy and John Dubin in that article, which is, we have one, which is with our public defender's office, and Peter Joy goes down there and does cases, right? And there's some schools, people may not know this, but NYU has a massive program that they call clinics that basically are putting students in all these offices all over New York, where there's a member of the faculty adjunct there, they do the seminar there, and then they call the clinic, you know? And we started a practicum at WashU because we had some unique opportunities to use some adjuncts, and I use them all, the Georgetown's not using that.
Yeah.
And to us, it's defined as, they're not our cases, right? They belong to the adjuncts, but there's a much heavier doctrinal component. So we're doing it in a death penalty clinic because it's just so freaking dense. And so we spend a lot more time in the classroom part than on our cases. And we just started another one with some adjuncts in the firm based on some pro bono stuff they do. But we're calling it a clinic because we appointed those people as faculty members and they follow all the usual rules of our clinics. The only difference is that they have more reading and they have more seminar time. Right?
Yeah. I struggle with that, especially for the...
We call it clinical practicum, we get around the idea that it just says practicum, right?
Exactly.
It's less confusing to employ, at least it still has that term, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I struggle with that a bit, and I think we're still struggling with it, just in part, quite frankly, to still continue to own it in my own area, right? Like to own it in the externship community. And I don't know, I feel like, but the word hybrid doesn't work well on a transcript either. People are like, what the hell are you talking about? Hybrid between what? And I had the same experience when I first started teaching in Arkansas and inherited a prosecution clinic. It was most definitively not a clinic. Like I was just kind of hanging out at the school and kids showed up for my class and then off they went. It was an externship program.
Because the prosecutors were not appointed as adjuncts?
Nope, and nor was I.
Some of this is just historic. I mean,
We've always had those.
Amanda's clinic was called a clinic because in 1975 that was the only word that was available.
Exactly.
And what I don't like about regulation is forcing us to fit things into cubbyholes when we can do a better job if it's not in that particular cubbyhole for our students. We have to live with, we have an ADA site visit coming up and we'll figure out what to call things or how to list them for them. But if a hybrid arrangement offers a much better experience to our students, I would hate to have the little cubbyholes tell us you can't do that.
Paul, I would push back a little on whether it's the regs. The regs, you're thinking about what classifies, what qualifies as this and that, and that's the reg pushing that. But I'd offer some pushback that to some degree it's the rankings and how those algorithms work that in part keep us on that historic train, because people don't want to rename something from a clinic to whatever else, in part because it changes how things get counted, and how many of this you're offering versus how many of that you're offering. And at certain schools too, like, looking at, what is it, the National Jurist had that practical training ranking thing out the other day, and one of the ways they calculate that algorithm is how many externship placements you are able to offer. Well, mine is infinite.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
As many kids as want, I can pay as many additional people to help me supervise as many additional kids as I want, and that's a privilege, and I love that. I'm complaining, not bitching about that. But how the hell do you do that math? And then for some of them, depending on how those are all viewed, and US News is one, and the number of clinics and the number of clinic seats makes a difference. And so I think some schools are also reluctant to then shift from we used to call it a clinic, and then now it appears that we've lost a clinic.
Yeah, that's go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, we have to ask ourselves, what's the importance of putting things in different buckets in the first place, And I can see how sometimes we get so caught up in understanding the technicalities between all these relationships. We feel like things should have different names, you know, but we're finding the students don't need that to understand what a school offers or what a program is going to offer. They just want practical experience in the areas that they're interested in, working with different people. And that's why we moved away from the practicum name, because the feedback we got from the students and the employers, like it wasn't helpful, even though in my mind I'm thinking like, oh wait, that's a different thing.
The ranking thing's weird. I mean, one day I see a copy of the National Juris and I see our name on the front page. Huh? You know, had no clue where that came from. It represents absolutely nothing to me in terms of evaluating the quality of our program, but it was some algorithm that somebody came up with and we happened to fit in unconsciously.
Our communications person made a great joke the other day that we ended up ranked somewhere high on some stupid thing, and she said, seeing it reminded me that I forgot to turn the data in, and maybe we do better when I don't tell them what we're doing. Right? Like,
We did come in number 2 in party law schools one year.
I think that data's already in.
And even worse, we were behind Arizona State.
You're always on call.
Are your schools driven by that stuff?
The party stuff, yeah.
No, not party stuff. We're definitely driven by that.
Sure. I'm gonna think
Well, I
of
have
it.
a question, because with my practicum, first of all, I'm not a clinician or an externship director, or any of that. I teach, well, I'm vice dean students, but I teach legal writing, that's where I came from. And I was asked to do this practicum, but they're calling it a practicum, everybody in the community calls it a clinic, including the judges. But I feel, in a way, I think in part they're distinguishing it is because we're limited scope, and therefore we don't need our students to get practice orders because they're working with volunteer attorneys. But I feel like the course might be being devalued because we're very, very important in the community now. When we're in the courts, it's like family court, for example, it's like 19% of their cases we avoid litigation in. That's huge. That's 34,000 petitions a year. Federal court is much different because, you know, you have the long drawn out cases, so we don't see as many clients in federal court as we see in family court, just because of the nature of the practices. But I like the hours, the amount of hours and the number of people that our community partners calculate that we're helping. I sort of feel like, and I've created a whole course. Yeah, I teach 3 hours a week in this course. And they're doing everything you would get. They get an extra credit. So they're doing everything they would get in a standalone course for the 3 credits, and then they get an extra credit for 120 hours of field work. So I feel like it's a way to devalue the course, truthfully. I feel that it's under the clinical department, but I'm not under the clinical department.
So there's a whole new term for what you have, which is a lab.
I'm not sure I like the word
I
lab.
know, but most people would call spitting off a credit off the regular course, experiential, everything from simulations.
Well, we
to
call it 4 credits. We don't really break the credits apart.
Yeah, I think it is a practice.
Because if you don't break it apart, you can't call it experiential and get credit of a 6.
It's
So
only
no.
4.
No, I
It's
know,
4
but if you
total
want
credits.
that 3, if you want the 1 credit where they're doing actual work to count towards experiential credits, you have to separate.
The whole thing counts as experiential.
Well, not necessarily under the ABA.
Unless a half of it, 50% or more of it has to be actual hands-on experiential, not, so it's.
Well, then that's a good,
I'm just
yeah,
saying.
that's a
Whatever.
good question to
Yeah,
talk
yeah,
to the director of clinics who's here with me.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I mean, I'm really sort of, well, and also in federal court, our community department doesn't have people admitted in federal court, that's me. And then our volunteer attorneys. So I'm just, I don't know, I'm definitely not a hybrid is what I've decided, because you don't get this department, so
Well,
I really
I'm
take
not-
this time talking.
I'm not sure there's a definition to
Yeah.
particular. I mean,
It's somewhere between a pure extern and a pure in-house clinic, right? Everything in between
Yeah.
is hybrid.
Well, and that's the problem we had when we were trying to decide what to talk
Maybe
about,
it says
was
like this, but
we
it
don't know
says
what
like
we're
this.
calling all these things, so we're not really sure where to,
If we can come up with a new word here.
Well, the double ALS has definitions.
Yeah, and I want to put a plug in, there's at least two glossaries. The first one was created by the Alliance for Experiential Education, and I chaired the group that's pretty broad that created the glossary. And we had hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of discussion. And we intentionally did not bring in the standards, and that's what the ALS does. They really build in the standards. We just thought we wanted to think about it separately from the standards. But what we came down to really, and you can Google it, find it, but is that if the person who is supervising the students, the direct supervisor of the student, is being paid by the law school as a faculty member, even if they're an adjunct faculty member, then that's a clinic. If they're not being paid by the law school, the direct supervisors, and there's, of course, the definitions are more elaborate than this, but I'm just boiling it down. Then it's an externship type of course. The hybrid, we did not go with the total definition of Berry et al. Because it doesn't need to be a full-time person, a full-time clinician, but if it's a field supervisor, an unpaid person supervising, and the clinic and a law professor, even if it's an adjunct, if they're together supervising the students on real world stuff, then it's a hybrid. So that, in trying to just like make it as simple as possible, and then we have lab, we have practicum.
So our intellectual property clinic has in-house cases supervised by our clinic director, and pro bono cases supervised by outside attorneys, and every student does at least one of each. What am I?
Yeah, so that's the first definition, yeah. I have no idea what that is.
Yeah, stuff.
yeah.
Um,
We call them a CUNE, that, just, that would be the word, it's the intellectual property CUNE.
Well, it sounds like
What do you think?
It's cute.
Yeah, it's cute.
What
What's the name of tell me the name of the alliance where this glossary is?
it's the Alliance of Experiential Education.
Okay,
For
okay.
experiential education in the law.
Yeah.
And I understand the benefits of being in a classification. I mean, I have to, going through a site visit coming up and gotta make sure we're correct in everything we do. On the other hand, when it's really hard to see a learning opportunity that's great and feel like we can't do what we would like to do because we need to be classified in a certain way.
Well, you
I mean, I
can't
just
do it,
hate
you
that
just
too.
need to know what regs will apply.
Apply, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's, I think, the thing, the places that seem to be, as long as you've got, I think, a good justification for how you're looking at it. So if the regs are designed to make sure, particularly all of the glorious externship regs, are designed to make sure that our ducks in a row, that the students are being supervised well, that we got paperwork, blah, all that stuff. If that's happening, I'm not sure it really matters. I think your point is well taken, that the students don't care about the terminology that much, except for, I would say, I feel that they do, at UCI they care. And they care because they prioritize that clinic thing. So if I call it a clinic, it means something to them that says something as compared if I call it something else. I'm not sure that was the case other places that I've taught. But I think as far as not doing it, I don't think that should be the stopper. It should be, you should still do it if it's a good learning experience and it's working and all of that stuff. I think a big thing is being consistent in the naming to some degree, consistent in the naming of Arizona, right? So that students can track and follow kind of what's happening. I know that if I took this and I liked it because it did that, if I take something else over here that's similarly in that same bucket, it's gonna give me a similar experience or expose me in the same way to certain types of work. I don't think that should be the stopper. I do think though it's interesting, like we were talking yesterday about things like going to Gage, right? Going to the Global Alliance for Justice. I went to my first one not too long ago, and it was so interesting trying to have conversations, not just in the sort of an international alliance, but having those conversations where they're saying clinic, and what we need is externship,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so to some degree, I think the value of that is so that our conversations, value of the naming, is so that our conversations when we're talking with each other and when students are comparing school to school, and then on top of that, the regs, that we're talking about the same stuff.
Yeah.
So, I don't know if anybody here has actually done any recruiting for students. I will back up our admissions director from time to time. And what happens is, the reason that they put so much weight on clinic is that's how they're mentored. So when they're in those pre-law programs, you know, one of those questions when they come to these law fairs is, what clinics do you have? So numerous times I'm trying to re-educate them during these law fairs, right? That it's experiential education and there's different forms of it. And so although we only have this clinic or these clinics, you can go and do anything through this. It goes over their heads. So I think systematically we need to drill down to those pre-law advisors or that other group and educate them on experiential education in the legal community, so that those students don't come in giving a clinic maybe more weight than an externship, because they don't know what an externship is.
Or that they don't come somewhere because you don't have somebody said you don't have a clinic in that area, but there's other options, right? To get you that experience in whatever that subject area is that you're interested in.
There's so little scholarship outside of English. Like, there's this community, there's CLIA, there's so much in English. In other languages, it's non-existent. It just doesn't, it's not there.
We're gonna fix that, right?
Yeah. Like,
We landed, for our veterans, I have a similar situation, because the community and the VA, they call it a clinic, okay, that's how, and it's actually at a clinic, so, you know, but that's what they call it. But where we landed internally on that was an intensive externship. And what we did was, when we did the MOU with the VA, we very specifically stated that it would be manned by students, externs, in the, but it's called the Homeless Veterans Clinic. That's kind of the community name for it. But internally, it's an intensive externship.
And we have we have a community taxpayers clinic that we send student externs to, but they call it a clinic. Yeah.
And the same with the family law.
And you also have pro bono student clinics.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the outside entity calling it a clinic.
Yeah.
in my community, there's been I disagree with the people who say it's impossible, but there's a big pushback from the local lawyers, because you have to understand that the legal profession is so young, but our formal legal education, for our judicial system and our legal education is so young. Being a lawyer is such a new profession that there's real fear from the local attorneys and everyone else that if they take law students, they're going to just be creating competitors. They're not going to get as much money. And so they really push back. You can talk to them about doing the student practice rule. You can talk about, like how beneficial this is. I have externs that they don't want to show them real cases. They want to show them cases that already are finished. Fun for confidentiality reasons, everything's very tribal and it's very private. But at the same time, part of it is because they don't want to necessarily mentor somebody that they view is going to just come up and take some cases away, especially if they have better English, right?
Yeah.
Now we're
And that's,
actually creating a competitor.
that was kind of one of our topics we didn't get to.
Yeah.
And we're 10 seconds from being out of time, but I think it's definitely worth thinking about this idea of confidentiality, conflicts. We place people in our regular externships with the PD's office, and then they go work their real job, after, post-graduation job is with the DA's office, and they're working on the same case they worked over here. And so, I think there's even a bigger risk with maybe some of these hybrids. And then, the other thing on my list we didn't get to that maybe you all can continue to think about and talk about is, if we create these, because our externships, we just have a list and we don't guarantee any placement they're gonna get an extern on any given semester. But if we create a clinic or a hybrid, we're pretty much guaranteeing those people they're going to have students. And so that's I think a real issue. So if we had another 30 minutes, I'd talk about those two things, but I think conflicts and confidentiality is a big topic that we need to talk about in all of our placement situations. So what else do you all have on your list? I took up the 10 seconds, so now we're past time. So what else do you all?
No, that's it. I mean, I think I liked that everyone shared their ideas. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you all.